Hey folks, this is Jason Lewis, the producer of the From the Shadows podcast. I just want to remind you about our website, fromtheshadowspodcast.com. We have a Facebook page. We would appreciate it if you like and follow. Also, join our discussion group on Facebook called After the Shadows. We have a Twitter feed. Please follow us on Twitter. It can be found with @podcast_from. Follow us on Instagram at From the Shadows Podcast. We have a YouTube channel. Go to the search bar of YouTube and put From the Shadows Podcast, and please subscribe to that channel. We are also on the Odyssey Radio Network, and we can be found there at odyssey1.com. We're still on the traditional podcatchers that everybody loves to listen to us on. We get a lot of feedback, so please rate the podcast and communicate with whether you're on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or Google Podcasts. We're there, and we appreciate it when you leave comments for us. We also have a Patreon page. It can be found at www.patreon.com/FromTheShadows. You can receive books, stickers, coffee mugs, and special content just for our Patreon subscribers. Check it out for yourself and see what packages that we have to offer. Well, that's all I have for you right now, folks, and thanks for being a part of the From the Shadows podcast family. So with that being said, let's get this episode started.
Okay, so Hal, remember? So I listen to a lot of podcasts on while I'm on the mail route. Okay, I'm just going to be honest to the American public. I'm not really paying attention to the mail. I'm paying attention to the podcasts that I'm listening to. But I came across this one called Imposters, and it is about this investigative journalist is looking into a guy who claimed to be an ex-CIA military analyst. Then he got a job on Fox News based on the idea that he was in this, did this undercover stuff, fought terrorism, that even the CIA didn't know he was undercover. That's how undercover he was. Okay. And I thought it was interesting because this guy was trying to find out whether he really was who he said he was, and even on Fox News, or another CIA guy who met him immediately thought he was a fraud because of how we talked to him about what he did. And so and you having some pretty high profile government jobs, I wondered if you had ever come across somebody who presented themselves, whether it was in a military branch or law enforcement branch or something that you then found out was just full of crap, or how did you?
Oh yeah, I'm going to throw a rock out there and probably shouldn't, but hell, a third of the cops I knew were frauds. They all pretended to be badasses or whatever, and they weren't. But I know the guy you're talking about. I don't remember seeing him on Fox News, only because when you had mentioned it, I looked him up but yeah, I'm going to use the term friend because he's a friend of mine. I got a friend of mine that duped a lot of people for a long time into being a soldier of fortune, and he let their imagination fill in the blank that he was a Navy SEAL, or he was a Marine recon sniper, or he was a Green Beret. He had a business card that said soldier of fortune. And
wait a second. What does that mean? What does soldier?
Well, there used to be a magazine. I don't know if they still got it.
I remember
that. Do they still
that.
have the magazine?
I don't know, but I remember that magazine.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
This isn't like Donny Osmond and Soldier of Love, right? This is
called Soldier of Fortune. Like my dad used to have them in his car, and it would, back in them days, it was like somebody, what like kind of like what Blackwater does now. The infamous Blackwater from the Iraq war. You know what I mean? Contractors.
Yeah.
but back in them days, they wanted to free the Congos or fight, somebody wanted to fight some proxy army, and they hire veterans or
Okay.
a legitimate organization would be like the French Foreign Legion. For whatever reason, the French soldiers, France don't want Frenchmen doing it, but they'll hire the French Foreign Legion, which is made up of mostly soldiers from everywhere but France, and pay them to do the dirty work, right?
I
So,
gotcha.
and this guy would go out and back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, he was big bodybuilder. He would go out Soldier Fortune competition out in Vegas and do very well. And his enablers were his father had a lot of money at the time, and he just had an absolute, to this day, got an astounding gun collection. H&Ks, which means nothing to you because you're not an H&K guy or gun guy. But it just, I mean, truckloads of guns and exotic knives and all kinds of stuff that only rich people can afford.
Or a soldier of fortune.
Yeah, or theory, soldier fortune, And I'm not like into these. I'm going to say Randall knife, and I don't even know if Randall knife's any good anymore. But so he'd pull out this Randall knife, and people would assume that Prince Baghdadi or somebody had given it to him for saving the royal princess from the Bedouin attackers, or he defended a diamond mine for Cecil Rhodes or something. You didn't know what was going on, right? You didn't know what was going on. When in reality,
he bought it at Cabela's. He just bought it.
No, I don't think you could buy that sort of stuff at Cabela's. I mean, you might today, but this is before the internet and stuff. So you had to travel in those circles to you had to be, but knowing what I know, I've seen behind the curtain many a time, and the thing that made him successful, he was a boy toy back before it was popular. So here he was in his early 20s to early 30s. Really was his 20-year reign was late teens to the late 30s, early 40s, right? So he was he still is big, good looking, had a bright flight scholarship to Mizzou, and between the bars and the beauties, flunked out or dropped out, and a smart dude, but big brawny guy, and he just went from one rich widow or divorcee to the next, and it wasn't until he fell, he ultimately, his downfall, like Samson, was a soiled dove. He fell in love with a mulatto stripper, and when she left him, he was devastated to the point where he's never recovered. He's living down on the river in a portable storage shed with an alternative energy source, stacked full of guns and ammo and fancy knives. And that's a fact. My brother's just listening. The people that know who I am in real life, most of them will know exactly who I'm talking about, and they're dying right now. They're dying right now because they know exactly who I'm talking about. I tried to get him. I come down there with the camera. I was going to try to film a pilot. You know how pilot season works. I mean, you've been around.
Yeah.
So back when I was in Minneapolis, I had some exposure to some of them circles, and I said, I'm going to film a couple pilots and shop them as a production company, right? So he talked a big game, and I had him and Bruce and Bruce from last week's show. Yeah, Bruce at least Bruce had been in a gunfight. He didn't have a Soldier Fortune business card, but at least he had been in a gunfight, and he'd shot somebody. I mean, even if it wasn't himself, even if it wasn't himself, but hey, they chickened out. Both of them chickened out. When the camera, when I call to action and turn the camera on, they got to put the brakes on, because they'll fight somebody in a bar or drive a Harley with no license down the highway 100 miles an hour. But when it came down to it, they were worried about the embarrassment that people would that
they were worried about being embarrassed to people that didn't know them, watching them on TV.
Yeah, they didn't want to be. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it turns out this guy really was a soldier of love. It's just that he's the one that took the bullet, then by the mulatto, by the stripper.
I could do. You know what? It'd be so far off topic, but I could do a dozen crazy stories. I'll tell you. I don't even know how much we want to go on this because my eyes are watering so bad.
let's give
About
let's give the listeners one good story at the end of this. Here, let's give them one.
A couple of years ago, I had a friend of mine that has done very well for himself. And then he married a medical doctor, which helps. And he's got a lot of rental property. Her family's got a lot of rental property. And he called me one day and said, "Hey, I got a problem." And I said, "What?" He goes, "Have you ever heard of this guy named such and such?" And I said, "No, because I don't live there anymore." He said, "Well, my wife's cousin rented this house out on this farm because these people, people with money acquired farms and stuff, and then they had a lot of times they have houses, so they rent them out or try to do whatever they can, or anymore a lot of them just doze them under. But so she had a renter that supposedly the local police officers, the deputies were scared of, and everybody was scared of, and they needed to get him his eviction papers served. And he said, "Do you know anybody that could do it?" And I said, "Well, I thought so and so, but he's dead." And my buddy said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, you think T-Bone, that's what we call this guy." He said, "You think T-Bone do it?" And I said, "Oh, I guarantee it. What's he going to pay?" And they told me a couple, "What do you think?" And I said, "Oh, you give him a couple $100, he'd probably do it. He'd probably do it just to try to fight the guy, to prove to all you guys that dude's really not that bad." Does that make sense?
Yeah, nothing to be scared
he'd go out there to fight the guy just to prove to the cops you shouldn't have been scared of him in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So next thing I know, he's got the papers served, he's got him evicted, and he's shacking up with the landowner, this gal that owned these pieces of property. So I almost rescued him. I got him rescued out of the shed down there on the river, and he couldn't. He navigated it for a while. They got engaged. So here he had a gal with money and property, and he was just, he's 50 now, so he was just over the hump. He needed one last, like Roy Hobbs, he needed one last home run, and and he hit the ball, but he missed the base. It'd be like a run around the bases. He jumps on home plate with his hands in the air, and you forgot to step on third. You are out, and he's back down to river. I gave him some ammo. We did a ammo swap the other day, but he had an old pickup. He's driving an old rusty old Ford pickup with a bale spike, and he had a round bale. He had to feed some cows. It's probably month before the weather got decent, but so a couple months ago I was with him. He's out there feeding cows. He went from living in a condo in Vail, Colorado with double-breasted mattress thresher to feeding hay down there on the river at his dad's place. So some people just can't get out of their own way.
That's good. That's good.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.